Mr. Beast goes to the market to donate his horse, and Whistling Diesel buys it for $2,000 instead. Mr. Beast says he'll deliver it to him in 1 week's time, but halfway through the week the horse dies. Mr. Beast offers him $10,000, but Whistling Diesel chooses to keep the dead horse anyway. The next week Mr. Beast sees and asks Whistling Diesel what he did with the dead horse. Whistling Diesel says, "Oh, I held a lucky draw, $50 for a chance to win a horse. 1,000 people entered, and I collected $50,000. Mr. Beast, shocked, asks, "But wasn't anyone upset with the horse?" Whistling Diesel replies, "Oh yes, only the winner, but I refunded him his $50. A Buddhist monk walks up to a hot dog vendor and says, "Make me one with everything." After a brief chuckle, the vendor makes the hot dog and gives it to the monk, saying, "That will be $4 please." After the monk hands over a $10 bill, he finds himself waiting uncomfortably while the vendor does nothing except stare back at him. Awkwardly the monk asks, "What about my change?" "Ah," replies the hot dog vendor. "Change must come from within." The 6th grade science teacher, Mrs. Parks, asked her class, "Which human body part increases to 10 times its size when stimulated?" No one answered until little Mary stood up and said, "You should not be asking 6th graders a question like that. I'm going to tell my parents, and they will go and tell the principal, who will then fire you." Mrs. Parks ignored her and asked the question again. "Which body part increases to 10 times its size when stimulated?" Little Mary's mouth fell open. Then she said to those around her, "Boy, is she going to get in big trouble." The teacher continued to ignore her and said to the class, "Anybody?" Finally, Billy stood up, looked around nervously, and said, "The body part that increases 10 times its size when stimulated is the pupil of the eye." Mrs. Parks said, "Very good, Billy," then turned to Mary and continued, "As for you, young lady, I have 3 things to say. 1, you have a dirty mind. 2, you didn't read your homework. And 3, one day you are going to be very, very disappointed." A cowboy rides through the desert, when suddenly he's surrounded by an Indian war tribe. "Well, he thinks to himself. Suddenly he hears a voice. "Not yet! You must do as I say. Quickly, get off your horse." Having nothing to lose, the cowboy decides to do as the voice says. "Now throw away your guns." The cowboy does so. "Okay, now go to the chief, slap him across the face and call him a squaw." Cowboy walks up to the chief, slaps him across the face twice, and insults him and his men. "Now," says the voice, "now you're A new CEO takes over the Twitter and decides to get rid of all the slackers. On a tour of the facilities, Elon notices a guy leaning on a wall. He can't believe this guy would just stand around on the job. Elon walks up to the guy leaning against the wall and asks, "What are you doing here?" "I'm just waiting to get paid," responds the man. Furious, Elon asks, "How much money do you make a week?" A little surprised, the young fellow replies, "I make about $600 a week." "Why?" Elon quickly gets out his checkbook, hands the guy a check made out to cash for $2,400 and says, "Here's 4 weeks' pay, now get out and don't come back." The man puts the check in his pocket and promptly walks out. Feeling pretty good about himself, Elon looks around the room and asks, "Does anyone want to tell me what just happened here?" From across the room comes a voice. "Yeah, you just tipped the pizza delivery guy $2,400. Rick had been in police work for 25 years. Finally sick of the stress, he quits his job and buys 50 acres of land in Alaska as far from humanity as possible. He sees the postman once a week and gets groceries once a month. After 6 months of almost total isolation, someone knocks on his door. He opens it and a huge, bearded man is standing there. "Name's Cliff, your neighbor from 40 miles up the road, having a Christmas party Friday night. Thought you might like to come at about 5 o'clock. "Great," says Rick. "After 6 months out here I'm ready to meet some local folks." As Cliff is leaving, he stops. "Gotta warn you. There's gonna be some drinking." "Not a problem," says Rick. "I can drink with the best of them." Again, the big man says, "More than likely gonna be some fighting too." "Well, I get along with people. I'll be alright." "More than likely there will be some wild sex too." "Now that's really not a problem," says Rick, warming to the idea. "I'll definitely be there. By the way, what should I wear?" "Don't much matter," says the big man. "Just gonna be the 2 of us." The priest angrily asks the altar boy standing 2 meters away, "Are you secretly drinking the holy wine?" The altar boy remains silent. The priest's anger grows. "I'm asking you. Can't you hear me?" "No, I can't hear anything from here, Father." "What do you mean? You're just 2 steps away and you can't hear me?" The altar boy smirks. Why don't we switch places and you'll see? They swap places. Now the altar boy asks, who's embezzling the church donations? The priest mutters, you know what? You're right. You really can't hear anything from here. An elderly man rear-ended a guy driving an expensive sports car. Enraged, the guy hops out and confronts the old man. Look what you did to my car, he yells. You're going to give me $10,000 right now or I'm going to beat you to a pulp. Oh my, says the old man. I don't have that kind of money. Let me call my son. He trains dolphins and he will know what to do. Dolphins, the other driver huffs, while rolling his eyes. The old man pulls out his phone, dials his son, and just as his son answered, the irate man snatches the phone away from the old man. So, you're a dolphin trainer, huh? Well, your old man here just rear-ended my car and I need 10 grand right now or I'm going to beat you and your old man to a pulp. I'll be there in 10 minutes, says the voice calmly on the other end. Exactly 10 minutes later a jeep pulls up and a guy hops out and proceeds to pulverize the bully, leaving him in a heap on the side of the road. When he finished, he walked over to his father and said, for the last time, Dad, I train SEALs. Navy SEALs, not dolphins. A burglar breaks into a house. He begins to search the home for valuables when he hears a quiet voice say, Jesus is watching you. He dismisses it as paranoia and carries on with his crime. He hears the voice again. Jesus is watching you. He knows this time it's not in his head, so he looks around the room and sees a parrot in the corner. He walks over to the parrot, and it repeats one more time. Jesus is watching you, the burglar says to the parrot. Is your name Jesus? No, it's Moses, the parrot replied. The burglar laughs and says, who names a parrot Moses? And the parrot says, the same person who named the Rottweiler Jesus. In Russia, if you wanted to buy a car you needed to order it 10 years in advance and pay for it. So a fellow goes to order a car, brings his cash and stands in line. The clerk says, very good comrade, you will receive your car on this day, 10 years from now. The man asks, in the morning or afternoon? The clerk responds irritably, 10 years from today, what difference does it make morning or afternoon? Well, the man says, the plumber is coming in the morning. One day an old Ukrainian man found an antique lamp. He starts to polish it off and poof, a genie appears in a cloud of smoke. Ho ho mortal, says the genie, stretching and yawning. For releasing me I will grant you 3 wishes. The old man thinks for a moment, and says, I want Genghis Khan resurrected. I want him to reunite his Mongol hordes, march to Ukraine's border, and then decide he doesn't want the place and march back home. No sooner said than done, thunders the genie. Your second wish? Okay. I want Genghis Khan resurrected. I want him to reunite his Mongol hordes, march to the Ukraine's border, and then decide he doesn't want the place and march back home. The genie scratched his chin in confusion. Well, alright. Your third wish? I want Genghis Khan resurrected. I want him to reunite his— Okay. Right. What's this business about Genghis Khan marching to Ukraine and turning around again and again? The old man smiles.
He has to pass through Russia 6 times.
Many years ago I went to my high school prom. It was a very involved process. Leading up to the prom I had to stand in line to get fitted for my tuxedo. I had to stand in line to reserve the limo for my date. Then I had to stand in line again to pick my tux up once it was ready. The day of the prom finally arrived, but I had to go stand in line to pick up my boutonniere. That florist was out of corsages, so I had to go stand in line at yet another florist to get a corsage. Finally, the limo picks me up and takes me to her house. I meet the dad, give her the corsage, and escort her to the limo in style. The limo drops us off at the prom, and we dance a few dances. Then my date says she is thirsty, so I go to get her a drink. And much to my surprise, there was no punch line. 2 Canadians die and end up in hell. Satan decides to pay them a visit, so he walks into their room and sees them talking and laughing. Confused, he asks them why they're happy. They tell him, well, we're so sick of the cold where we're from, and this place is nice and toasty. Satan, annoyed, storms away and goes to hell's boiler room, where he turns up the temperature. He goes back to the Canadians' room, along the way being begged by all sorts of people to put the heating back down. He enters the room to see the Canadians having a barbecue. Furiously, he asks them what they're doing. Well, we can't pass up this wonderful weather without getting out the barbecue. Satan realizes he's been doing the wrong thing. He goes to the boiler room and turns it down until it's at a colder temperature than ever seen on Earth. So he goes back to the Canadians' room, only to see them jumping up and down in excitement. He shouts at them in fury. Why are you still happy? They look at him and shout at the same time. Hell froze over. That means the Leafs won. The CEO of a company was in need of a secretary. He spread ads all over town. A few days later, there was a knock on his door. It was a dog. He had a newspaper in his mouth. He opened it to the classifieds page and pointed to the ad that the CEO had placed. The CEO was impressed. But he thought it was a joke, so he decided to test the dog. "Look, I need a secretary who understands the basics of computers." The dog went to one of the secretary's desks, climbed on the chair, turned on the computer and the printer in total tranquility. The CEO was amazed, but decided to go further. "That's good, but I need a secretary who understands spreadsheets." The dog quickly opened Excel, scanned rows and columns of data, and then used pivot tables to create dashboards of charts. The astonished CEO desperately followed. "Well, that's really fantastic, but my secretary must be bilingual," the dog replied. A husband and a wife are waiting at the bus stop with their 10 children. A blind man joins them after a few minutes. Soon, the bus arrives, but it is overloaded and only the wife and the 9 kids are able to fit onto the bus. So the husband and the blind man decide to walk. After a while, the husband gets irritated by the ticking of the stick of the blind man as he taps it on the sidewalk, and says to him, "Why don't you put a piece of rubber at the end of your stick? That ticking sound is driving me crazy." The blind man replies, "If you had put a rubber at the end of your stick, we'd be riding the bus, so shut up." An Englishman, a Scottish man, and an Irish man all walk into a pub with their wives. They all sit down and order a cup of tea. The Englishman looks to his wife and says, "Could you pass the honey, honey?" The Scottish man thinks to himself how clever that was, then turns to his wife and says, "Could you pass the sugar, sugar?" The Irish man, not wanting to be outwitted by the other 2 men, looks over at his wife and says, "Could you pass me the milk, you cow?" 2 fellas are walking in the woods one day when they come upon a gigantic hole, so big and deep that they can't see the bottom of it. Naturally, their curiosity gets the best of them and they start looking for things to throw in the hole. They find sticks and rocks and throw them in, but never hear anything hit the bottom of the hole. Eventually they find an old railroad tie and figure they'll definitely hear that hit the bottom, so they lug it over and throw it in. A few seconds pass, but they still don't hear it hit the bottom. They shrug and start to walk away, when all of a sudden a cow comes charging through the woods at them and jumps into the hole. "That was crazy," they say to each other as they're walking out of the woods. A farmer is walking into the woods at the same time and greets them. The guys tell the farmer about the hole they found. The farmer asks if the guys have seen his cow. They say, "As a matter of fact, we saw a cow come sprinting through the woods and jump into that hole." The farmer shakes his head and says, well, that couldn't have been my cow. My cow was tied to a railroad tie."